Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you all for joining this side event on measuring adaptation impacts, which is an extremely relevant topic, but for many it's also a confounding one. Well, as you all know, the global climate community has successfully created robust greenhouse gas emission reduction methodologies and tools, making them easily accessible and comprehensible for project developers and investors. By contrast, measuring climate change adaptation impact does not have the same level of standardization and still presents numerous challenges. So, why is this? Because adaptation is highly context specific. It encompasses physical, social, and economic dimensions. Understanding and measuring human vulnerability to climate change and how it changes over time requires collection of granular data, which can be time consuming and resource intensive. This presents a big challenge for private sector entities who have been traditionally focused on measuring profits and often lack the tools and experience to measure environmental and social impacts of their interventions. As an investment officer working on private sector climate projects, I often encounter these challenges that our partners face. We decided to have this session to explain how we at GCF assess adaptation impacts and what are the global best practices that private sector project developers and investors like you can use. This is meant to be a practical and helpful session for you all. So why is measuring adaptation impact so important for private sector-led initiatives? In the first place, it enables access to funding, as investors prioritize clear impact metrics when making investment decisions. Secondly, clear measurements also encourage informed decision-making on resource allocation. Impact metrics help establish KPIs that ensure that adaptation efforts are directed towards where they are needed most. Finally, clear measurements allow to monitor how well adaptation measures are functioning, identify gaps, and enhance adaptation planning and implementation. It is essential to equip private sector with the necessary skills and tools, while still maintaining an emphasis on resource efficiency. There is not yet a universally accepted framework for assessing adaptation impact, but a number of experts and organizations are actively working to address this gap. Today, we are fortunate to have two experts in the field who are advancing development of tools and frameworks to enable us to effectively measure adaptation impact. Lilian Macharia, a Director of Division of Portfolio Management at GCF, and Ellie Turner, Deputy Agricultural Lead at 60 Decibels. Please. First, I would like to invite Lilian to present GCF's adaptation measurement standards based on the Integrated Resource Management Framework, IRMF, as we call it. I encourage you all to use this opportunity to understand how GCF assesses adaptation impacts of its projects and learn how we support our entities in implementing these frameworks for GCF-funded projects. I'll pass it to you, Lilian.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure this is a good idea after people have had lunch, so I apologize in case of any indigestion as a result of my presentation. So just to give a bit of a background, I mean, this is a bit of a dry topic after hearing all the exciting news about how people are getting money, getting supported by GCF, but it's also really important in telling you how we try and make sure that the support we give yields the desired results. Trying to see if the presentation can be loaded. Okay, while we wait for the PowerPoint to come up, right? Okay. Okay, technology is not my thing, all right? So I need some capacity building. So TA, blended finance, I think. Okay. In the meantime, I think I'll just get started. As you know, the Green Climate Fund has grown significantly. Currently, we have a portfolio of about 228 projects, of which have benefited from about 12.8 billion worth of GCF funding. Oh, great. Do I turn here or do I turn here? Okay. All right. So out of that, About 31% is, let's say that 1% of our adaptation portfolio, which is comprised of about 162 projects, is 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 from GCF. We have about 25.6 billion worth of investment, and GCF has contributed about 7.8 billion. Interestingly, you will see on the right side of the PowerPoint that from private sector, we only have about a third of the existing portfolio, which is kind of worrying because there's a lot of need for financing for the adaptation, and I think that's why we're having this discussion. So, and then if you look further, you will see that the share of Africa in the adaptation portfolio is significant at 42%, which also means that maybe there's a lot more demand for support to adaptation sector within Africa. So the point, and then we measure our adaptation impact really in a very simple term on a global basis by looking at the number of beneficiaries that have benefited from the support. And this is either directly or indirectly. As of now, based on the estimates from our accredited entities, the support to Africa has yielded about 216 million, is benefiting 216 million beneficiaries, which is a big number. There could be a bit of double counting when you have projects in the same country. And then you also have some indirect beneficiaries, which is about almost double that amount of people who are benefiting from our support. But then I come back to the really critical point why we're having this meeting. One of the issues and challenges we have found is that, as somebody said, is climate finance is very technical. And that comes in terms of trying to justify why we are getting involved and what kind of results we expect. So to give you a brief breakdown, first, our investments are channeled into 8 investment areas, and they're all equally split between mitigation and adaptation. For mitigation, we look at energy generation and access. We have low emission transport. We have buildings, cities, and industries and appliances, and forestry and land use. And then in terms of adaptation, we look at how we support most vulnerable people and communities, health and well-being, including water and sanitation, infrastructure and built environment, as well as ecosystem and ecosystem services. And for us then to check how much we are generating in terms of the intended impact, we require that entities then have in place monitoring systems and indicators that help us really measure the results as we go along. So to measure the impact, the GCAF has what you call an integrated results management framework. And this has 3 levels of impacts that we look at. The first topmost level is that we're all looking towards bringing to bear a paradigm shift. And this is underpinned by, one, the scalability of our investments. So again, for us to create the paradigm shift, they have to be scalable. The second part of it is they should be replicable. So it doesn't just apply to one small context. It should be something that we see being applied to multiple contexts so that then again we have that shifting in how people do business. And the third part is then it should be sustainable. Otherwise, then the gains will be lost in the short term. And then below that, we have the second level, which is what we call outcomes. And again, here we have both outcomes from mitigation and adaptation, and we have things like the greenhouse gas emissions reduced or avoided. We have beneficiaries. We look at things like, we also look at maybe forestry, hectareage covered, value of assets made resilient, etc. So that's the second level. And the idea of these indicators that we have is really just looking at indicators that we can broadly aggregate at the fund level. They are not meant to be exhaustive because we realize there's so many, we're a global fund dealing with different contexts, a wide variety of projects. So we've just picked up some select indicators that help us measure some of the key results. And then below that, we have projects and programs. And all of these, of course, are linked to the broader debate, for example, contribution to the Paris Agreement goals, to SDGs, and also at the country level, how are we aligning and contributing to the national development determined contributions as well as action plans that have been determined at that level. Now, for private sector, Now, that sounds very public sectorish. Let's try and see what public sector would look like in terms of results. So for adaptation, we have three core indicators that we use to assess the impact. And for us, we define an adaptation benefit as an outcome that is derived from a GCF intervention, which aims to increase either the resilience or reduce the vulnerability of our beneficiaries and from the adverse effects of climate change. And this is compared to what would have happened, for example, without our support. So one of the first core indicators that we have is the direct and indirect beneficiaries. And it's pretty simple. It's really just saying which of the beneficiaries were directly impacted by a project, and is indicated in the PowerPoint. Those are the ones that are really where you come up with a proposal. You're saying we are targeting farmers, or we are targeting businesses who are producing solar, maybe components. Those are the direct beneficiaries for us. And from that, we expect that they would benefit from the adaptation, from the support that would give, and that would result in some adaptation or resilience outcomes. Indirect ones are the ones that are not, they do not receive our support. They don't get benefit, for example, from a GCF funding, but they also benefit, likely to benefit from that support. For instance, if you're targeting an enterprise, that's a direct beneficiary, but the workers are not necessarily the target. So those are indirect beneficiaries, or even their households, for example. So I think that's just the first indicator. The second one is then talking about value of assets that have been made resilient from the effects of climate change, and or how we help them to reduce GHG emissions. And here I think we've given an example. If you're looking at a road that's consistently flooded and you're able to either come up with drainage that helps deal with flooding, that value of that road is what we use to say that's one of the indicators that we use. The other one, of course, is when you're talking about natural resources, we look at the hectareage that's been brought under either improved low emission practices or climate management, resilient management practices. And what do we mean here? We have, for example, we've heard about solar irrigation, solar powered irrigation. So if you look at the coverage of farmers or number of smallhold farmers in total that have brought their land under that coverage, that's the other indicator we use over time. So I think it's not too difficult, is it? It's not too technical. We do these things every day. We can measure how many farmers we've supported, and we can see we are directly impacting or not impacting. So what is the responsibility of our accredited entity? If you are accredited to us, what do we want you to do? First is we will require you to tell us how you're going to monitor the results over time, right? You will construct, maybe you'll buy some components, you'll get farmers together. How do you measure the results as you go along? So we need to see the overall strategy included in your funding proposal, right? And then under that, you also tell us what are the indicators that will help you measure, tell whether you're on track or not. In business, you'd be saying you're looking at maybe the gross profit margins. We are not looking for profit margins, but at least we're looking for impact, for example. So how many farmers are subscribing to your product? So maybe those could be your indicators, and how many are women, how many are men? Are these among the target clientele you're looking for? So you want to see the appropriate indicators that help us tell whether you're on track to realize the targets, objectives of a project. And then we don't let you just do this on your own balance sheet, for example, out of our pocket. In our proposal and courtesy of our evaluation policy, we have an allowance for you to include in your proposal a budget line to cover the monitoring and evaluation costs that come with the project. So you have that option. So it's not all, don't consider it to be extra loaded, cumbersome cost of working with GCF. We have a provision for that, and that's provided for under evaluation policy. And then, of course, we also want to see then when do you plan to do your evaluation, and what is the budget, and is it in line with what we're looking for? And then we also have templates we would like to see. For some of them, we'd like to see the templates of what you have in mind in case, especially for some of the new projects that maybe are not typical run-of-the-mill, and we worked with you on that. So with regard to our results framework, The roles and responsibilities of our entities and GCF are different. The first one is that for accredited entities, we want you to be able to tell us the linkage between what you're proposing and the results areas and the results that you're looking for within our framework. And then from our side, we'll check and verify that this is aligned. So it's really more or less like we work with you in that respect. And and then finally, just to give you a few examples to tell you, it's been done. It can happen, and it's not as painful as it sounds. One, we have something that I think Acumen has done a lot of good things, and I think Ellie will speak to that. We have worked with them to identify, for example, get the pre-investment impact data so we know what it is we'll be looking for. And then they conduct company level surveys to collect more data and get feedback as to whether farmers are actually getting the benefits that were expected. We have also worked, for example, with the African Development Bank in their FAWA program. And there they, for example, have identified who are the direct beneficiaries. You can look at and what do those benefits look like. For example, the additional income from entities that benefit. We also look at, for example, the jobs created and also increased productivity from the enterprises, maybe due to better practices or things like that. And then, of course, indirectly, we'd look at things like the additional income for their employees or people who are benefiting for more availability of products and sometimes at a cheaper price. So these are some of what we consider direct and indirect. And then just to say from our side, our key takeaway is that, of course, it's important for all our partners to familiarize themselves with our results management framework and the guidance documents, which we have, and I'll give you a slide here which shows you all the references. We at the Secretariat are more than happy to work with you in terms of developing the appropriate frameworks for it within the proposal. And we also continue to have suits and tools that can support you as you go along as you evolve. So just leaving you with the resources, sorry. Yes, you can get more details from our results handbook, which tells you what to use and how we define different parameters. We have webinars that we've conducted and PowerPoints that you can log in and get more information. And of course, if you apply, we'll be there to support you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lillian, for this enlightening presentation. Nothing technical, nothing difficult, very straightforward. But now let's get a bit more technical. And I would like to invite Ellie, who will share insights on the framework developed for GCF-funded ARAF project, which has developed a state-of-art... Sorry, I think we will... Are you okay with that? Oh, I'm hiding. Okay, it's just moving. All good. Yes, she will present about ARAF, which has developed great adaptation impact measurement framework, and Ellie will also present about 60 Decibels resilience assessment tool, which was designed to make adaptation impact measurement affordable and accessible for private sector entities. Ellie, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Nestan, for organizing this session on what is my favorite topic. I hope that it is a favorite topic of some of you, but thanks for spending your lunch break with us. Are these too close to each other? Okay. So my name's Ellie Turner. I'm the Deputy Agriculture Lead for 60 Decibels. We have had the privilege of working with several GCF-funded funds, including some that you've heard from this week, including Kawisafi and ARAF. I wanted to take just a quick second to introduce 60 Decibels, just in case any of you aren't familiar with our organization, to give you a little bit of context for what I'm going to share. Okay, so 60 Decibels is a social impact measurement company. The name 60 Decibels is the volume of human conversation. That's the name of our company because we believe that in order to measure social impact, you have to listen to the people on whom you're trying to have that impact. And what we do is we listen to people at scale. So we developed a methodology that we believe is sort of the right-sized approach to enable a depth of insight, but to still collect that from a representative sample of your beneficiaries. And so the methodology that we landed on after a lot of testing and after a lot of work was a 15-minute phone conversation with an end user or an end beneficiary is really that right-sized approach to get you the information that you need, but to get it really quickly and in a way that is efficient and is low cost. We do this by, we built an infrastructure to do this. So we have a network of individual researchers in over 70 countries around the world who conduct these interviews over the phone in local languages. They're really well trained to build trust with the respondents and to elicit sort of really insightful responses from them. And the last really important element of our approach is our benchmarks. So we have asked the same questions over and over again to thousands and thousands of end users around the world. And what this has enabled us to do is establish standard performance metrics and standard benchmarks. And so when you get impact performance data with 60 decibels, we're able to compare that to peer companies in the same sector or in the same region to really contextualize your results. And this helps promote standardization, accountability, transparency in social impact measurement. That was a really quick introduction. I want to get to the more interesting parts, but if you have more questions about 60 decibels, you're welcome to come find me at the break or find my colleague Lena, who's in the audience. So now we'll talk about resilience and adaptation. I wanted to reflect just quickly on something that I heard in the Investing in Nature panel yesterday, which was that the metric of CO2 emissions is so clear and it's almost sexy, right? It's like so easy to understand. But there's all these other impacts, and in this conversation it was about nature, but I think for us it's an adaptation that are just so nuanced and so difficult to understand that it becomes a little bit harder for an investor to grapple with. So I'm not an investor, you guys are. But when I think about it and I think about making a decision to invest in something or to spend my money on something, and I can think about getting that back in terms of tons of CO2 emissions reduced or abated or mitigated, it feels like a clear decision. And then when I can imagine being approached with an investment that's going to increase climate resilient practices. I have a lot of follow-up questions about that. What does that mean? And of course, it's hectares under climate resilient practices, and there are many other indicators that could go in that field as well. But I think that's actually the problem. Right? There's so many different ways to say that something is climate resilient or to measure adaptation that it becomes really hard. And I think it's a huge barrier to investment. And so I put these numbers up here. I think you probably all know what they are. Everyone in this room knows there's a financing gap for adaptation. I put them up here not to draw causal inference. I measure impact for a living, so I wouldn't do that. But to just associate the two, to look at the difference between the two of them, and to really think about, okay, this clarity around impact metrics can be a huge barrier to an investor's decision to invest in something. And I think that if we had something clear and something standard that they could latch onto in the way that they latch onto tons of CO2 emissions reduced, we would make some progress against this gap. Okay, so what do we do at 60 decibels to measure resilience? We have sort of two broad solutions that I'm going to talk about. And before I talk about them in detail, I want to be very clear that we are talking about the resilience of households, right? So we measure social impact at 60 decibels. We understand how people's lives have changed as a result of a product, a service, a company. We don't look at environmental impacts. I recognize that those are metrics you will need for adaptation as well, but we're going to focus on household resilience or individual farmer human resilience. So the first way that we do this, I know you can't read the slides, but that's okay. I didn't make them for you to read. I made them just because Lillian was making slides. The first way that we do that, I'm calling the objective resilience measurement tool, and this is what we have had the privilege of developing with ARAF, who has really been a leader in the resilience impact measurement space. And the way that we do this for ARAF is really, it is a specific, very granular approach that understands for a farmer what practices they've adopted, what behaviors they use, what resources they have access to, and then it gives them an objective resilience score. And it's super valuable because you can sort of watch that change over time, and you can unpack an individual's resilience and understand what are the factors that is driving that resilience. This tool is developed for a specific audience that has a lot of technical expertise in resilience, right? They understand these indicators. They have been thought leaders in the resilience space. and it's very specific to agriculture. And so what we have done in more recent years is we have talked to more and more companies and more investors that are not GCF, that are not ARAF, but are sort of like, how do we measure resilience? What can we do? We don't know how, but we want to start demonstrating that we're doing something related to climate, and we just have no idea how. And we don't have a ton of time, and we don't have a ton of resources, and maybe we don't know anything about resilience. And so what we wanted to do was to build something for that audience as well that would help them make the decisions that they need to make, which are a little bit different than the decisions that a more resilience or agriculture-focused fund would need to make. And so the second tool that we developed, which is called a perceived resilience tool, really asks an individual household how their resilience has changed. So this is really a very 60 decibels way of doing something. We love to hear from end beneficiaries and ask them to reflect on how their life has changed as a result of interacting with a company. And so we ask them on a set of resilience dimensions. Do you feel like this company has made you more prepared for an unexpected weather event? Do you feel like your financial capacity to respond to an emergency has improved? One of the benefits of this is that it's not specific to agriculture. We can use it with any household anywhere. We can use it with microfinance clients to understand how their life has changed as a result of getting a particular type of product. And it also can be done a little bit more quickly and just with a one-time survey because you're asking the individual to reflect on a change that has already happened, right? So these are two very different audiences, but we wanted to have a system for measuring resilience for both of them, depending on what decisions they need to make. I'm going to go into just a little bit more of an illustration of what each of these two look like, because I realize that that might sound a little bit abstract. So this is actually a simplified version of what a result would look like for the ARAF or the Objective Resilience Measurement Tool. It's okay, again, if you can't read it, but what you want to see here is that actually we have 22 indicators. This is a roll-up at the dimension level, but we have 22 different indicators, and for each one, we ask a question or a set of questions to a farmer about what practices they're doing. So are you intercropping? Are you testing your soil? Are you conserving water in any way? And then based on their response, we score them on a scale from risky to resilient. So risky is that red bar, blue is that resilient bar. And then we can see the changes over time. And what ARAF actually gets is like 22 of these lines. But it becomes really clear for them to see sort of where are these big red bars? Where are the gaps? What is driving these farmers? What is preventing them from becoming resilient? And then you can sort of watch changes over time on these specific dimensions. For the perceived tool, it is a little bit different. And I realize that you can't read these that well either. But I wanted to put a couple of examples of the questions up there so that you could get a sense of the types of responses. And so really for this tool, we have 9 standard indicators of resilience. 4 of them are hypothetical. So we ask a household to think about a shock that might occur in the future and ask them how their perceived resilience has changed. So how do you feel more prepared? Do you feel like you know more about how to adapt? Do you feel like you would respond more quickly? And then for the subset of individuals who have actually experienced a shock in the last year or two, we asked them how they fared, and we asked them how severe was the impact. Do you think it would have been more or less severe if you hadn't had access to this resource or if you hadn't been working with this company? Awesome. That is the end of my presentation. I wanted to keep it really short, but just to give you a kind of introduction to the high level of these tools. But I wanted to end on a closing note, which is that we really need to accelerate the adoption of standard metrics if we want to unlock financing at the pace that we need to see change, right? I think someone else in the Nature panel said we don't have the luxury of time to wait for data. And I really want to underscore that point. I think everyone in the room knows it. It's time sensitive. And I think what we've seen at 60 decibels in our other work is that once you start putting the same impact metrics in front of investors, they get used to seeing them and they get comfortable with them, and then they can make investments based on those decisions, and it becomes a little bit easier, right? It makes that process easier. We've done that with our standard impact metrics, and now we want to do it with climate, right? And so the faster that we can get companies to adopt these metrics or to start using standardized tools to understand their impact on resilience, I think the faster we're going to see that impact on financing getting unlocked. So that is my final plea to you, and thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot, Ellie, for a wonderful presentation. I have only a few questions for you, and then I will open to the audience for their questions. I would like to ask Lillian first. You have worked with so many projects, and could you please share with us your experience? What did successful projects you managed to establish adaptation measurement frameworks? What did they get right? And what can other projects learn from them?
Thanks, Nastine. Good question. I would say the first thing is that they're very fast, deliberate, and targeted. They're very clear what the impact they're looking for is, and who their target is, and how the target beneficiary or clients are going to benefit. Again, relative to the GCF requirements. I think if you interchange financial returns to climate impact returns, the translation becomes a lot easier. I mean, I think the challenge is sometimes the concept is very complicated. So if you just make it very clear that instead of looking for necessarily financial returns, you're looking at climate impact returns, that becomes a bit easier. So I think that's one bit. The second one is that they were also very proactive in seeking help and clarity and guidance from the Secretariat. So they know so they're better guided on what to do. And thirdly is that they've also invested in really also getting the systems right from the beginning so that then after that, the reporting is a lot easier.
Thanks a lot. And now a follow-up question to Ellie. So some private sector entities managed to successfully establish these frameworks. And what are the gains that they got after this?
Sure. I think the benefits for a company of doing this are sort of twofold. The first is they can demonstrate their impact, right? They can communicate to potential funders and maybe even to consumers if they're consumer facing that they care about climate and that they are serious about impact, right? And just having that report that says, here's our impact on climate so far, here's where we're going to go is super useful in that. And I think the second benefit is really in understanding their customers in a way that promotes the sustainability of their business, right? And so understanding, okay, here is what we've done to make a household more resilient, but here are some of the gaps, and those gaps could ultimately get in the way of the customers being customers in the future. And so we've seen companies that have like developed bundled offerings or wraparound services to fill some of those gaps along with their product to more holistically build the resilience of their consumers.
Great, thank you. Now I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are impressed with what you two presented and they want to do it. But how do they start? How do private sector entities start on establishing adaptation impact frameworks? This is a question to you, boss. Lillian, maybe we'll hear you from you first.
Okay, I think I'm not the right person, but I think I can answer it because I think I'm on the other side of asking than doing it. But I think the main thing is clarifying the value proposition, because then you're then able then to say what is it, you track whether you're delivering on that, and I think making sure that you're very clear on what that is. I think that's the first thing. Once you clarify that, I think that's where you start then figuring what do you need to be able to monitor and report on that. So if you know the climate case for what you're trying to do, then you're able then to say, okay, how do I check that I'm delivering on that? So I think that's just that clarity part of it.
My advice to companies or funds that haven't done this before that are interested in doing it would be don't overthink it and don't let it scare you. It doesn't have to be like this really long, many stakeholder, many year exercise, right? We can start small. You can just do a quick survey. It takes 3 months. You can get some insights and go from there. Then maybe you decide that you want to build it or change it or change your framework. But I think that data is so valuable that you can get it now and keep going from there.
Sorry, if I may add to that, I think just one thing that comes to mind is also that keep it simple. The more complex, the more troublesome it gets, but keep it simple. So.
This was great to hear. Both of you are aligned on this idea of starting simple and grow slowly. Great, thanks a lot. And now I would like to open for questions, if there are questions in the audience. No questions? Clear? There's no question.
Yes, so it's Raphaël Dumont from IMP, Impact Fund. One question for the GCF. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, is GCF expecting, for example, a fund or a company to work with a third party like 60 Decibels or another? Or can it be like internal evaluation? Because I don't know if there is an adaptation fund which focus on impacting 1 million farmers, how how will you evaluate the real impact? Is it just the declaration from the fund? As does it need to be certified by someone else? And another question for 60 decibel. Would you have a budget in mind for, I don't know, an assessment, a survey at the fund level or at a company level, just to have some figures, if it's possible?
Okay, a very quick answer. Normally, we have interim and final evaluations, and those ones we require that they have an independent party doing that, just so that it's, because the normal we have annual reporting, which is self-reported by the entity. And then for interim and final evaluation, our recommendation is to have an independent function for that. So for some entities, they have an independent function, so those ones we accept. But others outsource that just so that you have the objectivity.
Sure. So it depends, obviously, on the country that you're in and the length of the survey. But we do really, part of our mission is to make this low cost and accessible to everyone. And so the sort of like entry level, completely standardized tool can be somewhere in like the 12 to 16,000 US dollar range. But the more custom, the longer that it goes, the longer the survey goes, the higher it will go from there.
There's one more question.
I wanted to understand if there is a specific monitoring, reporting, and evaluation framework that you normally align to, or if there is an existing one that can make the process easier for an institution, for example, if they're already following a specific framework.
Is this question to Lilian?
GCF and Decibels.
Sorry, if you don't mind, did you ask if we have a particular format for monitoring?
I just wanted to, because there are so many sustainability reporting, monitoring, and verification frameworks. Do you have a specific one that you align to? And is there a specific one which, for example, a partner is already following that particular framework, can make the procedures that are followed in the reporting easier for that particular partner?
Okay. I just want to clarify, the verification, if you're looking at different things like GHG and all that, and carbon standards, we do not have one particular one that we ascribe to. We basically go for the accepted international standards, and because then you get into very choppy territories in that. So for reporting, we only have our own template for reporting, for annual reporting. And then for interim and final evaluations, we have guidance on what we expect entities to use in this regard, and this is guided by our evaluation policy. But we don't align with any one particular entity or standard for our reporting.
I'm not sure exactly how this question applies to us, but I'll try to I'll try to respond. So the indicators that we use in our standard tools were all sort of developed to align with the resilience indicators from the Committee on Sustainability Assessment. They're not identical. If an organization comes to us and they have a framework already or they have specific indicators, we can design a survey around them to make sure that we're able to capture the data that you need. If a lot of organizations come to us and they don't have that, and so we can recommend indicators based on the impact thesis of a company or of a fund.
Thank you, Ali. We are right on time. Thank you both for coming here and sharing your experience and insights with us. And thank you all for listening.